Welcome to the film analysis, today with John Wick Chapter 4 by Stahelski. Even though the John Wick series has now been expanded into a franchise, the fourth film can and must be regarded as an independent work of art without equal. Like the three films before, Chapter 4 is again about the enjoyment of violence in cinema. Cinema can purify violence from violence and transform it into an aesthetic play. Now we see Keanu Reeves again as John Wick, and he very soon meets Caine hunting him down. He's got the brief from the high chamber, and there's a supervillain, a new one. This is the Marquis, played by Bill Skarsgård, who really just wants John Wick dead, nothing else. To that end, he is willing to do anything. It all begins in the desert of Jordan, a short episode, until the Marquis decides we have meanwhile arrived back in New York to blow up the famous Continental Hotel. He excommunicates the manager Winston and shoots the concierge. Winston will stay by John Wick's side. He will also become the second in a duel that must be seen to be believed. John Wick is the wanted man, the pursued man. John Wick is the one trying to get away again. He tries to escape in some way from the high chamber, from its rules, although everyone suggests to him that only death can redeem him. So we meet John Wick in Japan at the Continental Hotel in Osaka. There will be an attack, the high chamber, which is so brilliantly choreographed that you think this film has already reached its climax. But that is by no means the case. It continues to Berlin. There, Stahelski has built a nightclub with waterfalls where people dance. And in these waterfalls, the light breaks. The use of light will be the subject of this film analysis. It is incredible what you can see there. On the one hand, of course, there are these virtuoso fight scenes that we have known for a long time from the John Wick series. But above all, it is the work with light that shapes these films. From Berlin, we go on to Paris, in the Louvre, in front of Delacroix's painting Liberty Leading the People. They debate what to do next, and it all boils down to a duel. A duel that, although you have seen thousands of duels before, once again has a real surprise in store. A bounty is placed on Wick's head, and thus John Wick also becomes an object of speculation, because the more difficult it becomes to catch him, the higher the sum people are willing to pay for him. First $18 million, then 20 million, and on and on. Hot on his heels is a Mr. Nobody, a tracker who is just waiting until the high sum he wants is reached. It's a film full of great ideas, especially in the fight scenes. You see incredible things, and you've seen so many endless fight scenes. But there is this one scene, for example, with a very tall, very heavy man fighting a rather petite woman. But this woman had energy, and she manages to push him onto the stairs. He tries to crawl his way up the steps, and then she rides him up the steps and stabs him with little knives. You can see tremendous camera work in nearly every scene. It's frantic, but we never lose track of the action in John Wick. It's not a wild flailing around as we know from many blockbusters. We sit in the cinema completely disoriented, no longer knowing where up and down are, and at some point it's over. That's not the case in John Wick. This film is always designed to show us the overview, as it truly creates excitement. And this overview is taken quite literally, namely when we see a one-shot scene in which the camera accompanies John Wick in a room at first. We are in a larger building, and then this camera goes up and hovers over the individual rooms that John Wick must pass, shooting, fighting. We see the floor plan from above. This also underlines the artificiality of this film world. We see the scenery here, and yet, or precisely because of this, it is so incredibly exciting. Yes, what is this about? We see bodies, fabrics and weapons. The fabrics are interesting. You see purple jackets at the poker table, glittering jackets with plastron worn by the Marquis John Wick in a dark suit with a dark tie, or with a white or grey shirt, and you see weapons in rooms like guns, rifles, knives and sabers. Most of the film is set in interiors. The film is 170 minutes long, and of course one could say kill your darlings in some places, but then again it's hard to say which scene should be cut. Certainly a return to the first film, which was still very simple in its illumination and didn't have this monumental world of the high chamber, would have been appealing, but at least we can once again experience a certain reference to the first film. Towards the end, John Wick must go to Sacré-Cœur. There is a very long staircase leading there. He must take 237 steps. And of course, there will be a lot of fighting on this long staircase. But it was only with the second part that a completely new world emerged here. The director tore his characters away from the reality in which the story had once started. And now there is this wonderful world in which we find ourselves. A world built above all of light. It is yellow and green when the attack begins in the hotel in Osaka. Later we witness a sunrise that has a light atmosphere of 19th century paintings, even though artificial light was used because the time window is very short there. We have the use of fire, of candlelight. We see the lamps of road traffic. We see neon signs. But above all, there are showcases that are illuminated and light sculptures. The film particularly emphasizes the immateriality of light here. We often don't know exactly what these lamps are that are shining, what produces these incredible colors on the screen, and this magic of light can also be experienced in art. I highly recommend Googling James Turrell's light installations. We are avant-garde here. Art in mainstream cinema above all. It gets interesting when the light and the water come together in this Berlin club. We often see figures dressed in dark or shimmering silver moving directly in front of the light or in the light, and we have arrived at a high degree of abstraction, because John Wick, despite these 170 minutes, is the minimum of a feature film. The story is still told relatively stringently if you accept that the high chamber has its own logic, but the story is really not the point. All you can say is that it boils down to something, a duel. But that's not all it's about. It's more about these rooms made of light, isn't it? No, we must be more precise. In the film, rooms only become clear by being illuminated. Otherwise, everything would be dark. Film is light, nothing more, and that's not a platitude. Red, purple, green, yellow, blue, grey, metallic, it glows, it shimmers everywhere. We see dots, lines, streaks of light. Sometimes we can't pinpoint it at all. What is there that shines like that? Often neon, of course. Well, if we look at color film, we can first say that it is actually much closer to our reality. This is also an idea that the film theorist Rudolf Arnheim dealt with as early as 1932 in his famous book Film as Art. Arnheim wrote, "It is the same with bright colors as with spatial depth. The fact that the film artist is dependent on black and white brings him to particularly clear and impressive effects. The painter, who does not mechanically take his colors from nature, as is the case with color film, but creates them anew with his palette, has the possibility of distancing himself from the resemblance to nature as far as is necessary for the achievement of his artistic intentions through a suitable selection of colors, through the distribution of the colored areas, etc. The colors are not used in the same way as the colors of the film. The colors of color film are, as far as can be judged today, at best similar to nature." End of quote. We are talking about 1932. What Arnheim is trying to say here is, if you try to duplicate reality, then of course you may make use of a color film. But it should be more about stylizing. Now film has progressed much further in terms of technical progress, and Stahelski now shows us what you can really do with color, how you can also create worlds here that have nothing to do with reality or little to do with reality, as is the case with black and white film. Arnheim writes, "If the possibility of making art with color film still lies entirely in the undefined, black and white has been a self-evident and highly effective means of art for many years. For the reduction of reality color values to those of the one-dimensional gray series provides a welcome distance from reality and thus the possibility of creating images through brightness values, decorative and depth of thought." End of quote. And this is exactly what we are now experiencing with color thanks to technological progress. Depth of thought images and decorative images. It is a film in which not much is said, and when it is not much significant is said, and it's especially interesting in the dialogues between Caine and John, all they really say all the time is John, Caine, John, Caine. And that's all it needs, because here thoughts are articulated wordlessly, namely through light. John Wick is an avant-garde film. It is not comparable to the generic worlds opening in Marvel films. While these are also far from realistic, they lack abstraction. However, cones of light and glowing luminous areas of color structure John Wick. The light is immaterial, the light source is not. The immateriality of light contrasts with bodies, fabrics and weapons. These in turn cut, absorb, reflect the light. Are we dealing with human subjects? The Marquis is protected by his power. He moves through the rooms in a completely different way. He also rarely needs to fight. He is all too human in that we even see him eating a piece of cake. This is not true of the other characters, who we often don't even see drinking. Add to that the injuries John and Caine suffer, and we don't seem to be dealing with human subjects. Of course, we are dealing with a high degree of stylization, of exaggeration. No one could survive these falls and blows in real life, but we should not make it too easy for ourselves. Certainly, John Wick is a speculation object for the tracker. It could go to 40 million maybe. The world is after John Wick. There are phone operators going on and on about the price. How much does it amount to? How much can you get for killing John Wick? And yet, we are already dealing with characters whose subject status is a precarious one. We see spaces made of light that can do without people. Interestingly, we are dealing with spaces in which the human being is tolerated at most. It is about the alienation, which we also experience in so many spaces, especially in the futuristically designed ones. Despite all the coolness, all that becomes a total world experience in the film. One shudders. John, Caine, Winston and the others are subjects in the truest sense of the word. Namely, in the way Louis Althusser conceives the subject, which is namely a subject subjugated as a subject by the ideological state apparatuses, which can be the school, the church. Here it is the high chamber. The invocation of the subject, that is the police who say, "Hey, you there," and you feel meant. This invocation of the subject ensures that we always already feel subjected to an institution. So, in a way, we are not free. And that is, after all, the big issue. Will John Wick achieve freedom in any way? Does freedom only lie in death? And this invocation takes place again and again through the high chamber. Someone enters, the receptionist wants to speak to the manager. Someone gets a card in his hand saying that John Wick is now the person he must find. Name calling is characteristic of the whole series and especially of the fourth chapter. The subject is always subjected. Several times it is emphasized that only death can set one free. In fact, that escapes any invocation and the invocation of the high chamber. Without an institution, without something like the state, whatever, one is in fact only the friend or the loving husband, in short, the human being. Cinema reminds us of what is in danger of being lost. One is first a human being and then a citizen, an employee, etc. Don't forget it. It becomes almost superfluous to ask what John Wick has to do with us. We are also strangers in spaces. We pass through barriers, are illuminated by neon signs, touch screens illuminate our faces. The high chamber stands for an inscrutable set of rules, but have we ever read the terms and conditions? The film also stands for arbitrary rule. The Marquis ultimately decides in an authoritarian manner, as we see time and again even in democratic states. So metaphorically speaking, one can say, yes, we are also dealing with a nation-state rule in the high chamber in a certain way. And we can think of Friedrich Nietzsche and what he puts into Zarathustra's mouth. The state is called the coldest of all monsters. And of course, the high chamber also recalls international corporate structures. Some arbitration tribunal decides in the interest of capital. And then there are the invisible gatekeepers we feel when we check into a hotel, right up to questions of citizenship. Nothing really gives you a foothold. The high chamber is an arbitrarily evil ruling god. The slogans heard in the dialogues are crutch sticks that quickly shatters. Yes, there are phrases like, there are 3 kinds of men, and then this is carried out, but that leads nowhere. And what about the emotions? there is this great loneliness. There is a certain brotherhood between the characters, between Caine and John, and between John and Winston, but that's also just a code that you can slip into at times, but it doesn't keep you warm. John Wick Chapter 4 turns out to be quite beautiful and cold, while it's often just cold outside. But in cinema, at least, we don't watch, we see. It would be nice if you would like to support the film analysis financially. You can do so via my bank account or PayPal. Also, you can find me on Patreon. Thank you very much.